All right, good morning. Hope everyone is doing well and welcome to this is the second day of the Elder Law Boot Camp. It's so awesome to see everyone here. As Ann said, I'm with the Tennessee Commission on Aging and Disability and do a couple of things and know a lot of you and have met a lot of you over the years. So I also run the Title IIIB Legal Assistance Program that kind of is a very small portion of the legal assistance now going out to folks age 60 and over across the state of Tennessee. And just gotten to know a lot of you through that and through the Senior Legal Helpline and just other projects that we've been working on over the past couple of years. Apologize for the news about the invoices, but we will all be happy when the receiver asks for the original copies and we're able to produce them, right? Okay, so any questions, just shoot all those to Ann and she'll get them to me and we will get them. I will actually see counsel for the receiver on Friday morning, which is when we'll get, I'll get that absolutely confirmed. I know that's correct on the original invoices. And also we'll talk about the reports. I'll talk about that with Jim. Okay, so today, and I need to be mindful of my time, we're going to talk about elder abuse and financial exploitation in general, and then talk about some of the things that the Commission on Aging and Disability we are seeing related to elder financial exploitation and financial scams. And I will actually tell you a story of a financial exploitation that happened Monday. So today is Wednesday, right? I've been traveling. Sorry, I was in Knoxville yesterday. I am on a different board and I was actually at the board meeting and one of the board members came up and said, we have a problem. My mother received a call from someone who said that she won $16 million. And then to get that $16 million, she would have to mail them, I don't remember the exact sum, it was probably $10,000 in taxes because you always have to pay the taxes up front, right, to get the money. So we are talking about someone, the board member, the daughter, is, you know, a highly educated individual, a highly successful individual in the Nashville area. The mom had taught school for years and years and years. She taught over at Harpeth Hall. So we're talking about very educated people with, you know, some means. She was going to the bank to get that money out when she just happened to mention this to her daughter, who immediately hit the panic red button and said, absolutely not, do not do this. This is a scam. Well, it's not a scam. They told me you would say this. The people who called me and told me I won this money told me you would tell me it was a scam, but it's not. It's legitimate. It's really, I'm really going to get $60 million and won't that help everybody so much? So the daughter and the son-in-law went over. They talked to the mother, convinced her that this was a scam, not to send the money. Well, I get an email on Tuesday. So apparently the mother communicated to the scammers that she wasn't going to mail them the $10,000 for the lottery winnings, right? On Tuesday, I get an email that says, now my mom received a call that said her grandson, and we'll just call him JB, was in jail and needed money to get out of jail. And she believed them. I believe it's the same scammers. I believe it's the folks that had the lottery scam. When she said no, they just called her back the next day with a different take on a scam. And they said, he's in jail. He needs $5,000 right now to bail him out and to get him, you know, where he needs to go. We think he's injured and we think he needs some medical care as well. So the grandmother, the mother goes down to a local bank that is very prominent in this area and speaks to her banker, withdraws $5,000 in cash, puts it in an envelope, puts an address on it, and mails it out. So when we say that elder financial exploitation is a problem, we are not overstating that problem. We cannot emphasize enough how often this happens to the folks that you all are going to deal with every single day. So right now, where we're at is we have someone who mailed $5,000 in cash in an envelope to some unknown people. I'm waiting to get the names and addresses. We still have that information. I don't know if it was in the US. That will make a difference as to where we tell them to report this, if it went domestically within the US or if it went to, you know, Romania or Nigeria or something like that. So we're waiting on that information. We're also going to do a report with APS. We'll talk about APS and financial exploitation in just a minute through the course of this presentation. The APS won't do a lot about this particular situation because this was more investment savings and those types of things instead of governmental funds, and we'll talk about that. But at least we'll have that report made and we'll have that paper trail. And then we're just going to insist that, you know, the daughter is working with the mother to work on a durable power of attorney and other documents that might be able to keep her debit cards and credit cards and banking information from being, from the mom being able to go to the bank and being able to withdraw this money. And we'll talk a little bit about the right of self-determination and the right to make bad decisions, but then kind of when does that kind of go into, in this situation with the grandmother, we've clearly demonstrated the ability that we're having some trouble making good financial decisions, right? So does that mean at that point that somebody should step in? Who should step in? In this case, the daughters did. But unfortunately, the mom no longer, or fortunately, depending how you look at it, no longer has access to any of her funds. The bank is going to call anytime that she tries to go and withdraw this type of funds. And we'll talk about a new law in Tennessee that kind of should have come into play with this situation, but didn't really. So we'll kind of do that. And we're also working on setting up a meeting with that bank and those bankers and just talk to them, because this is a very large, I don't think it's a federally chartered bank. I think it's a Tennessee bank, but it's still something that they need to talk about and something that their tellers need to be aware of. So starting off with that story, this is unfortunately not a really uplifting and happy topic, but it is something that you do need to be aware of. And I know that a lot of you are, and we'll just kind of talk through it and talk about it today. Any questions? Don't wait until the end. Go ahead and raise your hand or just yell at me. Hey, Pete.
In the situation that you
Yes.
described, we have had in the past something similar.
Mm-hmm.
We were able to notify the post office. We notified the post office on the other end, and they were able to get the money back because, the other end, stopped it.
Right.
Because it was aware. So I don't know how many days have gone by, but.
Not many, and that's why I'm waiting with bated breath to get the address, because that'll tell me a lot. Like, we can contact the post office if it went domestically. If it went out of the country, our hands we're a little more limited in what we can do. But yes, she's supposed to email me this morning with that name and those addresses. I'm really hoping it went to an address in Maryland, because that'll make it a little bit easier. I don't know if we'll ever get that money back, but maybe we can start working on it. And then another thing, even though this seems like an isolated event and it's $5,000, it's not isolated. They are doing this. They probably did it to 6 other elders on Tuesday, the same day, right? So if we can start making these webs and making these connections and showing that this is an organized crime, which is basically what it is, then we start getting people like the U.S. attorneys involved, and we start getting people like the FBI involved. I was at a presentation about 2 weeks ago where an FBI agent came in, and they actually took on a case where a lot of the folks were in Nigeria. They were scamming seniors. Your son is in jail, your grandson's in jail, you won the lottery. They would get the money. They would put it in, it went to, the graph of where the money went was amazing. Like, it went to a million different bank accounts, and how they would text each other and move it from account to account so it's harder to trace. And then they would take it, they would eventually withdraw it and buy used cars and send them to Nigeria, and where they would be sold. Apparently used cars are a hot commodity there. But they were able to shut it down because more than half of the individuals were working out of the US. So they would arrest them when they would come here. There's still warrants outstanding for 2 people, but they were able to arrest 8, and they brought them to trial, and they got convictions on 6 of them, and 2 of them pled, 2 of them cooperated. So there was a really high success rate from the FBI's point of view on taking that to trial. So, but we have to keep reporting and showing these $5,000, $10,000 transactions, because there are part of a larger web. People just don't wake up one day and call an elder and say, oh, your son's in jail, send us, $5,000 or $10,000. It's part of a larger organized event. Okay, so any questions, just let me know. Apparently we are recording, so I am blocked by red tape. So I'll be kind of standing back here. Usually I wander around, but I can't today. So, all right. Well, this is the clicker, right? It just doesn't like me this morning. I can use this. Nope. Oh, okay. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, so let's talk first. When we think of elder financial exploitation, we think of adult protective services. All of you know what adult protective services is. We'll just do a brief overview. It's part of the Division of Community and Social Services within the Tennessee Department of Human Services. It is mandated by state to intervene in circumstances of abuse, neglect, or exploitation of vulnerable adults. So Adult Protective Services in Tennessee serves those 60 and over, or those 18 to 59 with a physical or mental disability. So a vulnerable adult or one who is of advanced age. Please don't throw anything at me. That language was put in the statute a very long time ago, when the Older Americans Act said that we would serve folks of advanced age, which meant 60 and over. That was done when the life expectancy was much lower than it is now. So please don't get offended. I have to go by the statute and what my federal regulations tell me as well. So that's just an overview of what APS is and where they're located. Have you all had some interactions at some point in time with Adult Protective Services? West Tennessee saying no, never. It does seem to be this is really interesting, and this is a little aside. It seems to be very region specific as far as how much interaction and cooperation you have with Adult Protective Services. East Tennessee, the cooperation seems to be really well. Legal services providers in East Tennessee, pretty good?
Cookville, Upper Cumberland, mixed reviews.
Mixed reviews? Okay, so and as we go across the state, it seems to get a little bit less cooperation and interaction. So by the time we get to Middle Tennessee, it's like, sometimes there's pockets of really good cooperation and communication, and sometimes not. And then when we get to West Tennessee, you guys are awesome. I love West Tennessee. I spent an awful lot of time in West Tennessee, but sometimes the communication and cooperation there, it just doesn't, it's very different, let's just put it that way, than other parts of the state. And we're seeing that because we've implemented a new program that works very closely with Adult Protective Services to provide services to these folks. And we'll talk about that when we talk about resources. And in East Tennessee, we're getting more referrals than we can handle. Middle Tennessee, we're kind of, it's okay in certain areas. And in West Tennessee, I have advocates who've been in the field for 3 or 4 months and have received 1 referral. You can't tell me that elder abuse is not happening in Martin, Tennessee, or in Jackson, Tennessee. So that's APS, just kind of an aside on the cooperation. I think programs like this and funding for Elder Trust will just continue to increase the visibility of you all with Adult Protective Services and the communication and bridge building with Adult Protective Services. I'm really hoping that that will work because they're always looking for legal resources for some of their folks. And until Senior Trust came around, we really had, legal aids, which are amazing. And we had some Title IIIB funding, which is always inadequate. I'm quite aware of that. So there was always this great demand, and we may not have been able to meet it. Hopefully this will help us, the Senior Trust will help us meet that demand and continue building those relationships with Adult Protective Services. Do you all have contact information for your local Adult Protective Services folks? Field investigators? Yes? Some no's, some yeses, some maybes. I have a list of all of them. Let me see if I can get permission to send that out to you guys, because I think it would be really, really, really helpful to have. Would you guys like that information? So you would know in your area, the supervisor and the field investigator? Okay, all right, let me check on that. They sent it to me, so that, where I distribute it from there is kind of our decision, right? Okay. So in addition, Adult Protective Services is the organization that is mandated to investigate allegations and for the purposes of our discussion today, abuse, neglect, or exploitation. But in addition to Adult Protective Services, there's also this whole list of entities that also have some type of investigation or support when allegations of abuse, neglect, and exploitation happen. So you have the Long-Term Care Ombudsman's Office. They're not regulatory, but they help folks with quality of care issues when they're in a long-term care facility, right? So you can have APS investigating that case, and you can have the Long-Term Care Ombudsman working on that case as well. The Tennessee Department of Health Facilities Licensure. They are the regulatory entity that look at long-term care facilities. So in addition to APS looking at an issue in a facility, you could have the Department of Health Facilities Licensure looking at an issue to see if the facility violated some kind of rule or regulation. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Later today when we talk about resources, we're going to talk about their Medicaid fraud unit. They can also be investigating cases of abuse, neglect, or exploitation in facilities. Now, their requirements there are many of them, but one thing to keep in mind with the TBI involvement with that particular unit, it would have to be a case where Medicaid funds were being used improperly by the facility. Your local district attorney's office can also do investigations into abuse, neglect, or exploitation. Your local law enforcement, your VAPIT or VAPIT teams, which are your vulnerable adult investigative protective teams. Those are new teams that came about with a law that was passed and came into being, I believe, January or July of 2017. I think January 2017. That says that district attorneys, law enforcement, and APS need to sit down around a table on a regular basis in all judicial districts and look at screen out reports from Adult Protective Services and look at reports from Adult Protective Services of abuse, neglect, and exploitation to put another set of eyes on those reports. And I can say that there are 31 judicial districts, and in all of those districts, these VAPIT teams are meeting. Some of them more frequently than others. Some teams meet twice a month. Some teams meet on a quarterly basis, but they are looking through all of the Adult Protective Services screen out reports and investigative reports for that particular period of time to see if there's anything else that can be done. So in those cases, the VAPIT teams would kind of pick up when Adult Protective Services screens something out and says that for some reason or another it didn't meet their criteria for investigation. The VAPIT teams, law enforcement, and the district attorneys and other invited members could say, oh, but we can take a look at this. Oh, it was financial exploitation. It was financial exploitation of someone's retirement funds, and that's not a governmental fund, but it's still theft. It's still a crime. Law enforcement could then pick up the ball and run with it. Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse, keep them in mind as well because they license a bunch of facilities across the state. We still can't find a list of all the facilities they license, but if there's a problem in one of them, they will be doing an investigation. They're actually doing an investigation in Upper Cumberland right now of a facility that has had some issues, shall we say. But just keep in mind, I don't think Adult Protective Services is necessarily really involved in that situation right now, but mental health and substance abuse is. Yes?
So I tried to get them involved 4 years ago.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that.
Yes. The record reflects that we have tried many times to get them involved. And actually, mental health just made a complaint related to one of their clients in that particular facility last week, and it was immediately screened out. So mental health called me, I called APS. So that complaint is now coming back up, and we're going to actually take a look at it to see if there's something that we can do. So we're having situations where sometimes maybe the APS intake workers don't really critically think through all of the issues. So just keep that in mind. But keep in mind that Department of Mental Health can investigate. They have their own investigative teams and can take investigation lead in some certain circumstances. Tennessee Department of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, or DIDS, they license facilities, and in their facilities, they will usually take the lead, even though they work in conjunction with APS, Adult Protective Services. And TennCare, I've seen TennCare investigate claims of abuse, neglect, or exploitation when it relates to their members in a particular facility. In the particular facility in Upper Cumberland, TennCare is very involved because they happen to have a number of members in a facility that's struggling and was rated and all kinds of terrible things. So that, we're trying to think about where people can be placed and, are they being financially protected. So TennCare could also investigate some allegations. Just keep in mind, though, that the overarching umbrella is Adult Protective Services. They have the mandate to do the investigations, but you can have involvement from all of these other agencies. Yes, sir.
And Laura, with the VAPIT, is that something we could ever refer folks to or contact, or is there a mandate to just kind of automatically look behind?
So the VAPIT teams are run by the district attorneys, and they are by invitation only. The meetings are. There are statutory members of those teams, and the statutory members are law enforcement, district attorneys, and Adult Protective Services. They don't really accept referrals. They look through all of the complaints that have been made to APS of abuse, neglect, or exploitation in that particular area over a certain period of time. There are other members across the state. We have the Department of Mental Health attend some of these VAPIT meetings, DIDS attend some of these VAPIT meetings, Ombudsman attend some of them. I think in West Tennessee, you all actually attend some of the, you are members, yes. So they've been invited by their district attorneys to attend. Is that what the comment was?
Yes, yes. And so I would suggest if you're not a member of the VAPIT team, that you contact your local district attorney, talk to them about possibly becoming a member.
Please do. The more people on the team, the better. Some of the district attorneys are very closed and only want, the 3 statutory members on their teams, and then others are very open and accepting of all members. I see some head shaking as far as you've tried.
We tried. They won't let us be on that. We used to have our own coordinated community response team.
Yes.
And that kind of shut down when VAPIT, and they picked a representative to go, but they wouldn't let us.
Oh, they wouldn't let the whole team go. Oh, so that's tough. Anybody on a VAPA team? Anybody in here? West Tennessee, yeah, you guys are. Anybody else? Yeah, oh yeah. All right, so yeah, and we also have a list of all the district attorneys and the designees who are running these VAPA teams. If that might be helpful, if I could send that to Ann, and that might be helpful. Just know that there are elections, right? The district attorneys, it's an elected position. I think it's up to date. We updated it not that long ago, but just know that, you know, some of it may have changed since we last updated it. Okay, so no referrals to the VAPA teams, unfortunately. All right, so any questions about this? Pretty straightforward, just trying to keep in mind the other folks and the other entities, mostly state. Oh, and somebody else who's not up here is disability rights. They have a federal mandate to go into, and they can go into any licensed facility, so they can actually go into jails and prisons and all that kind of stuff, and they can do investigations, and they can check on complaints and allegations of abuse, neglect, or exploitation in those types of facilities. So keep that in mind. They're an underutilized resource here. Yes?
I'll just add one, Department of Commerce and Insurance, they complete scans.
They will, yes. And we have sent a number of them over there. I've never heard the result of them, but at least we're making them aware that this is a problem. Yes. So Department of Commerce and Insurance. Yes, ma'am.
That actually can find, you know, people depending on the company. I've been involved in some of their investigations from the company side, but not in reference to elder abuse,
Right.
in reference to other things. So I know they have the capability. I don't know if, you know, how far they go in terms of elder abuse, but I know that they definitely will, if they believe that any sort of any allegation falls, let me say it this way, if the company has violated any rule that falls under their rules and regulations,
Yes.
then they have the jurisdiction to fine or penalize or even threaten to go further.
Correct. And that is really important to keep in mind if you have a corporate entity that's accused of financially exploiting someone, which does happen. I've had a situation where we had a CPA who became a trustee of a $5 million trust, and all of a sudden there's about $200,000 left in the trust. It's like, so tell us what happened here. So that was definitely one that we sent to Commerce and Insurance, to that particular department that looks at the entities, because they help with the CPA licenses and those types of stuff. So they did an investigation into that particular situation. So absolutely, if you have a corporate entity or if you have an individual, you would just refer them to different parts. Consumer Affairs over in Commerce and Insurance would take it if it's just an individual scamming another individual. There's another department that would take it if it's a corporate entity that's accused of fraud or scamming. Okay. All right. So APS, you all know this, but just briefly, how to make a report. You can do it online now, and I encourage everyone to utilize the online reporting feature, because when you use that, you get a number, and you're able to go back into the portal and look up that report and get a little bit of information about what's going on with that complaint of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. That's maybe more than you will get if you call in and you're relying upon an APS field investigator to call you back. So you can make the report online. You can call their intake number. Just know that their intake is centralized. So if you're calling with a complaint from West Tennessee, it will come into a call center here in Nashville. And if you're calling from Johnson City, the same thing. It will come to here. It will come to a centralized call center where the intake folks will take it. We've had some reports where I was at yesterday. I was doing a meeting yesterday with APS and TCAD. And someone in one of the meetings said that we're having trouble with intake workers hanging up on people. So just throwing that out there, just be mindful of that. If you do, here's what APS said to do, is to call back and ask to speak to the intake supervisor. Her name is Mamwa Hill. And if you're not getting a response from the intake folks, to call back and ask to speak with Ms. Hill or Mamwa Hill. So you can try that. The intake folks are not supposed to hang up on people. Even if it's a complaint that doesn't meet APS's criteria, they should still take that complaint. And that's another big thing we're finding. They don't always want to take the complaint. If you're calling in with a complaint, intake should take it, unless it's maybe in Arkansas. You know what I'm saying? It's not something in Tennessee. Intake should go ahead and take it, and then intake should do their job and do the screen out or say that APS is going to investigate. Okay? I know that some of you in this room have had that issue before. Just call back or just go online and enter it online. And you can enter it, you can make a complaint anonymously, either online or on the, through the APS hotline. APS doesn't really like that, but it's still possible if you didn't want your identity known for whatever reason. Okay. Or you can send it by mail. I always joke and say carrier pigeon, if you really just want to put a complaint in the mail and send it to Adult Protective Services. That is the least reliable way to get those complaints. Or you can fax it. The state still uses fax machines. I don't know why, but we still use fax machines. We call them the black holes though. So I'm just saying if you fax a complaint, I would make sure I called it in or I did it online as well. Because their fax machines are probably checked as frequently as ours. We have one, but everybody forgets about it and we forget to check it, and they don't have it come to our email yet. So we have to go pick the paper up, and then that means the fax machine has paper and you know the whole 9 yards. Okay, any questions there? Pretty straightforward. So who should report according to the APS statute? If you have a suspicion of elder abuse, neglect, or exploitation, or vulnerable adult, sorry, everybody should report that. So this is taken directly from the Adult Protective Services slide deck. So I just put it up there. We all know this. We do get into issues of attorney-client privilege. The purpose of this presentation is not to get into those, but we know that we do. But there will be, I believe, some discussion a little bit later on about attorney-client privilege and reporting of abuse and how to handle that, you know, correctly and properly. I'm just saying that the statute says everyone has a responsibility to report adult abuse, neglect, or exploitation. And it's a reasonable suspicion, according to the statute. So you don't actually have to have proof. That question comes up all the time. Do I need to know that my next door neighbor is, you know, that my next door neighbor's grandson is stealing from his grandmother? No. The grandmother comes over and is like, I can't pay my light bill because my grandson has my debit card and keeps spending all my money. It's a pretty reasonable suspicion, right? So you can make the report. There is some immunity from liability in the statute as well. If a report is made because there was a reasonable suspicion and it was made in good faith. So in other words, you're not going to make a revenge complaint on someone, right? Which, believe it or not, happens on occasion. Particularly when we have warring families and we have family members that don't agree. We occasionally see that. And APS sees way more than we do over at the Commission on Aging and Disability. We just get them when they've called APS and APS won't do anything because there's no abuse going on. So then they write us 20-page letters about how terrible, you know, the guardian is or how terrible the power of attorney is being. All right, so report abuse. What does APS do? They accept reports. We've talked about that. They investigate and intervene when appropriate and necessary. They arrange for the provision of services. Please keep in mind, Adult Protective Service really doesn't have a lot of services that they can provide. They don't really have a lot of money. They can provide a little homemaker services, but they're not the service provision entity. They're the investigative entity for abuse, neglect, and exploitation. They can seek court intervention in certain circumstances. And those circumstances seem to vary pursuant to the region of the state that you're in. Just FYI. So definition of adult, I thought it might be helpful. That's a lot of text, but just know that when Adult Protective Services is looking at an adult, it's someone who's 18 years of age or older. They have a mental or physical dysfunction or advanced age. Don't throw anything at me. Advanced age is defined as 60. They can't manage their own resources. So typically when I've said that the Commission on Aging and Disability has a new program to provide services to elders. It's called the CREVA program. We use this exact definition for who a vulnerable adult is. And I can tell you what we do. We look to see if someone has a caregiver. If they're not able, they have homemakers coming in because they're not able to take care of their activities of daily living. So that's kind of what we look at for vulnerable adults. They have a mental disability. We don't get medical diagnoses or anything like that, but they have a mental disability. They live in a group home. They have supported living. Those things tend to indicate to us that the individual is vulnerable. Not an adult that made a bad decision, but an adult who is vulnerable and needs some assistance. All right, so that's adult. Know that for Adult Protective Services, their eligibility criteria for their program is it's an adult, so age 60 and over, or 18 to 59 with a mental or physical disability, meeting their definition of vulnerability, and they are, in most cases, there's a caregiver who's caused a problem, okay? And that causes a lot of issues, which causes a lot of screen outs with Adult Protective Services, because if this caregiver piece is not there, in a lot of cases, they actually will investigate it. So has anyone experienced that? Where you called Adult Protective Services with a problem, and because it was a random stranger or something like that, they wouldn't investigate? No? Good. Okay, great. But just know their definition of a caregiver. If it's financial exploitation, you have to have a caregiver for them to investigate. Here's their definition. It's an individual or institution that has assumed the duty to provide for the care of the adult by contract or agreement. Things to keep in mind, the caregiver may be paid or unpaid. That's really important because sometimes we tend to think of caregivers as only being paid, but a caregiver can be a family member who's not paid. They've assumed the responsibility of caring for someone. And Adult Protective Services, in their own presentation, so this is not my interpretation, this is their definition, gives the criteria for a family member to be classified as a caregiver. They must reside in the same building with or regularly visit the adult. They know or reasonably should know of their adult's mental or physical dysfunction, and know or reasonably should know the adult is unable to provide for his or her own care. Okay?
Can it be an oral contract or agreement?
Yes, absolutely. You do not have to have a written document between family members or even between people they're paying. We see in a lot of situations in more rural areas of the state where we have somebody from church who comes over for $10 an hour and sits with the elder, and things start turning up missing. That's still considered a caregiver.
Or neighbor?
Or a neighbor, yes, a neighbor, someone from church. Sometimes they're paid, sometimes they're not, but either way, APS is going to look at it the same. There doesn't have to be a written, 50-page contract between the parties. And it can be a family member, it can be an unrelated person, but it just has to be someone who's providing care for that elder or vulnerable adult. Their definition of abuse, we're running short of time. You all can look that up, but again, this is taken directly from the Adult Protective Services slides. Their definition of abuse, physical, APS recognizes physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is the only area of abuse that does not have to be perpetrated by a caregiver for Adult Protective Services to investigate it. So keep that in mind. Neglect occurs when basic needs of a vulnerable adult are not met by the caregiver. Self-neglect make up about 30% of the APS complaints and referrals right now, and APS will not investigate self-neglect cases. Keep that in mind. Neglect, on the other hand, is where we have a caregiver who doesn't turn the individual or who takes their money and spends it for themselves, and the elder goes without food and goes without medications. That's neglect, and that is something that Adult Protective Services would investigate. All right. Financial exploitation, again, APS's definition, what it means, the improper use by a caretaker. So going back, we're using caretaker and caregiver interchangeably here. Sorry about that, little inconsistency in the statute. Funds that have been paid by a governmental agency to an adult or to the caretaker for the use or care of the adult. So for Adult Protective Services to investigate financial exploitation, we have to have a number of criteria met. We have to have an elder, 60 or over, or a vulnerable adult, 18 to 59, with a physical or mental disability. We gave you the definitions earlier. And you also have to have a caretaker, a caregiver, and that was the definition we talked about earlier, this person here, who's supposed to be taking care of the elder, paid or unpaid. And you have to have, the funds have to be governmental. So that's an awful lot of restrictions on the investigation of financial exploitation. If you ask me, no one really did, but I'm going to go ahead and give you my opinion anyway. Okay. We are one of 3 or 4 states in the union that still have the governmental funds restriction on our Adult Protective Services ability to investigate financial exploitation. So we are in the minority. Most APSs across the nation can investigate any financial exploitation, whatever the source of the funds may be. We have a lot of seniors in the state of Tennessee who receive Social Security, and that may be their only means of support. So this definition, kind of works, but then again, it kind of doesn't. Where I had the CPA who, embezzled $4.5 million, there was not $1 of Social Security money or governmental funds in that. That was the sale of a business that had been in the family for generations. So Adult Protective Services complaints were made to Adult Protective Services about that situation over and over and over again, but they were always screened out because the victim did not meet eligibility criteria. Okay, so keep in mind, if you have a case where financial exploitation is going on, but APS screens it out, go back to the statute and check to see if all of this eligibility criteria was met. Now, I will say that commingled funds If there is an account where the Social Security funds are going into it, as well as the IRA distributions, if they're commingled, Adult Protective Services will take a liberal view of that and consider it exploitation of governmental funds. And in a lot of situations, they will investigate that exploitation. So I see some looks. Have you all had some experiences where you've called in financial exploitation and it's not been investigated? Yes. Okay. I don't work for APS, but I'm just trying to give all of the definitions. And another thing to do, the APS director and I work together, I will say, on a daily basis. If it's something where you just really get stuck, you're always welcome to shoot me an email and I'll be happy to bring it up to her. And sometimes things happen and sometimes they don't. We've been successful in getting cases reopened where there really was, where intake maybe didn't look through it carefully enough, or the investigators, the APS investigators went out and didn't find any abuse when we know whether there was abuse or exploitation when we know there was. So I'd be happy to do that if that helps. But just know that I'm constantly talking to APS about the issues that you all bring to us and the financial exploitation that we're seeing. And I think slight changes have started to maybe happen. My fingers are crossed. I'm seeing skeptical looks. But I think in the past, maybe 5 years since they've had a new director and since we've all been working so closely together, that there have been a few changes. And I think that now your financial exploitation complaints are being taken a little more seriously than they were. When Adult Protective Services went back and looked at how much it would cost them to investigate all complaints of financial exploitation, the fiscal note on it was about $3 million. And APS is an agency of a budget of about $8 million. So that's how many more staff members they would need to investigate all of these complaints of financial exploitation. So I'm just kind of just giving you that information. Recently, the legislature asked Adult Protective Services to go back and see how many complaints they've received and see how many more staff members they would need to investigate these complaints. So apparently it's a lot. All right, so any questions here? I know you all know this, but just going over it. So financial exploitation, again, this is straight from the APS slide deck. Someone improperly uses funds. Social Security disability is considered a governmental fund. Supplemental security, veterans pension, teachers pension, EBT or SNAP benefits, all of those are considered governmental funds. Just keep that in mind. And I've had some success. We're seeing more and more exploitation recently of state pension funds. And we've actually been successful in arguing that those are governmental funds as well. So keep that in mind. Financial exploitation, just keep in mind, Adult Protective Services always likes to tell us this, that folks have the right to self-determination. If someone has capacity and they understand what they're doing, they have the right to send that $5,000 in an envelope to unknown scammers because their grandson is allegedly in jail. But if they don't have the understanding to do that, that's fraud, it's scam. I would still argue if you have the capacity, it's still fraud and a scam, but anyway. So APS just wants everybody to know that everyone's given every opportunity to make plans for themselves to the degree possible, that adults, unlike children, are entitled to make bad decisions if they want to, including bad financial decisions. But there comes a point when it does cross that line. Financial exploitation, just briefly, then we can take some questions. 2015 report that we pulled up estimates that Americans lose $36.5 billion each year to financial scams. That's an estimate. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it's not. It was done by a very reputable organization, so this wasn't something that, Scammers Are Us put out there or something. It was put out by a I want to say, goodness, one of the large banks. I don't remember which one. So someone who kind of would know what's going on. Financial exploitation in particular is estimated to be vastly underreported. We see a lot of shame issues concerned with elders who mail that $5,000 off and later find out that their grandson was in Nashville all along. And just going about his day and just his normal day and working at Starbucks. So there's a lot of shame involved with that. Most folks don't like to report that. And that results in, it's estimated that 1 out of every 25 cases of financial exploitation are actually reported or to any type of entity or regulatory authority. Some common exploitations, and I've highlighted some that we're seeing a lot. The lottery scam, the one that we started with, where you've won $16 million, you got to pay us the taxes up front, and then you'll get $16 million in your account. If it's too good to be true, it always is. That's never a legitimate thing. So what I always ask seniors when I do presentations to senior centers and at YMCAs is like, did you play the lottery? If you didn't play the lottery, how do they even know to email you? I mean, how is this legitimate? So, you know, just kind of taking it back there and just trying to get them to think about, did they actually enter this? There's one going around right now that's a Publishers Clearinghouse scam, and it looks very legitimate, and folks think it's Publishers Clearinghouse. But remember, Publishers Clearinghouse is not going to ask them to send money up front if they did indeed win. Did they actually play or enter this? Always start with asking that question. The home repair traveling conman, we see that one, but I think that one's very rarely reported because, again, it's probably a smaller amount of money in some cases, and folks there's that shame element to it. But we have seen it recently with roofs, actually. You know, your roof is hail damaged. I need, you know, I can repair it for $6,000, but I need $3,000 up front. And of course, the people never come up by and do it. So the grandparent scam, which is the one where our friend JB was in jail when he was actually, you know, working at Starbucks yesterday. You're called, folks are told their grandson or granddaughter is in jail, need you to send money immediately. That one is very successful. And another thing why these scams are so successful is I spend a lot of time role playing with seniors when we do these presentations about hanging up the phone and not answering the phone to start with. Generally, if someone calls them, they're just going to pick up the phone. And we talk about how to, you know, I'm not advocating being rude, but with scammers, I say, be rude and just hang up. Don't say anything. Yes?
And on this one, the thing that's scary to me is they're using Facebook and social media. So when they talk to the grandparents,
They have their names. Yes.
They can describe and know things about
Right.
their family because they're using social media.
And a lot of times we find our seniors are using Facebook, which is wonderful, and we want them to use social media and interaction, but a lot of times the settings aren't locked down enough. So it's like all open and someone can easily access it and do exactly what Ann said and have the names and know where they're traveling and know all these details about them. Charity scams, we hear that one, the police call and try to get some money. There are some legitimate scams that call legitimate organizations that will call asking for money. The vast majority of them are not legitimate. We just tell folks if they're going to answer the call to have the charity send them a letter or send them something in the mail. Don't ever give them anything over the phone. The utility company, you need to come outside. I've not actually heard of that one happening. At least I've not gotten a report of it. I'm sure it does. Roof repair, telemarketing scams and accompanying threats. This is the jury scam. We've had that one happen. We actually had a sitting judge, will not identify the area of the state or the judge, who was actually scammed by this one. A senior received a call saying that they missed jury duty and that they were going to be arrested on Monday if they didn't mail in $1,000. I think this happened on Saturday. They're like, I don't know if this is right or not. So I'm going to go to my next door neighbor who's a sitting judge and should be able to tell me if this is legitimate or not. The judge talked to the scammers. The scammers were so good, they convinced the judge that this was legitimate. And it ended up the senior mailed $1,000 in green dot cards to a random address because they had missed jury duty and were going to be arrested on Monday if they didn't. So there are all kinds of red flags in that one, but this really truly happened and came across our desk about 6 months ago. Yeah, they'll never see their money again. But red flags on a Saturday, jury duty, there's no fine associated with not showing up for jury duty. You should do your civic duty, but you're not going to be arrested or fined. And the green dot cards. Never, ever, ever. If anybody asks for green dot cards, money cards, anything like that, it's always 110% a scam. Why they didn't know this, why the judge went along with it, I have no idea. But this is a sitting judge, so that kind of gives me a little pause for our judiciary. That's why I'm not identifying. It did happen in the state of Tennessee, but I'm not identifying the area. I know who it was. So I always have to be, fortunately, I don't have to show up in court, so I don't have to show up in front of this judge. Money sent via telegraphs. We're not having a lot of the telegraphs, but we are having a lot of folks going to like Western Union in Walmart and places like that to send money because the banks are getting more suspicious of wire transfers. And in a lot of cases, the banks will hold a wire transfer if they think it's elder financial exploitation, whereas we're finding that Western Union and Walmart will just be like, oh, you want to send $5,000? Who do you want to send it to? Please fill out this card and you can go on your merry way in 10 minutes. So.
Laura, what's the statistic? I've heard you give us a statistic. It's something like 93% of Tennessee seniors have bank accounts.
Yes, it's, yeah, almost 94% of when we did our senior legal needs assessment a year or so ago, almost 94% of Tennessee seniors actually have a bank account at a bricks and mortar institution. So that's why it's so incumbent upon us to get the banks involved with stopping this elder financial exploitation. We do have a project in the last couple of minutes I'll talk to you about that will standardize training on elder financial exploitation for banks and credit unions for their frontline staff. It's called the Bank Safe Project. We just had a kickoff. It's being implemented at 20 pilot institutions across the state, where there's training for frontline staff, frontline tellers on how to identify financial exploitation, what to do if they notice financial exploitation, and then how to report it to Adult Protective Services and to submit their suspicious activity reports or SARS reports. That training will be available to all aging service providers later this fall, and I will make sure that everyone gets an email if you'd like to go through it and take it. It's a really cool training. It's an online training. It's about an hour. It's actually really well done. There are games in it, and it's not just a PowerPoint and someone talking at you. So it's really cool, and I really think it's going to help banks and credit unions identify financial exploitation and then try and stop some of it. Talks about taking folks out and interviewing them separately if they're coming with people who are demanding money and things along those lines. So we're trying. We don't have any standardized training in the state of Tennessee for banks and credit unions on how to identify and stop financial exploitation. The training we do have usually costs money. So it's really attractive that this particular training is free and that they're able to access it. They'll be able to access it from our website, the Commission on Aging website, and then a couple other websites across the state. And anyone, like I said, anyone will be able to take that.
You have,
Yes.
and the place of individuals talking about this, is the elderly folks just don't even come to the bank and they just keep all their money at home.
We have seen that. Yeah.
How do you convince them to put it in a bank?
Because that opens them up to someone just coming in there. Word gets around small communities. They know that Miss Jones has, money in her mattress or, money in the coffee can in the kitchen counter, which opens them up to someone just coming in and taking it all. And then we have no recourse for anything. I don't know, just encourage them that the banks are looking out for them. The banks are insured, those types of things. I don't know though, if someone has gotten to age 80 and has never used a bank, if they're going to change their mind, but you can always try, right? And we see that more often in rural communities. Yeah, small communities.
Terrified of that.
Correct. They're terrified of any type of involvement by someone who's seen as the government or someone who can tell them what to do with their money. What if they go take their money out? And some of it comes back, their parents had gone through the Depression and their money disappeared. And, it goes back to a lot of what they heard growing up, and they don't want to trust the banks.
And some of you have like over $10,000.
Yes, we have some with thousands. And
they read about if you put $10,000 or more, the government's coming after you. So
Oh.
nothing I can do now.
oh,
But I mean,
it's,
those are the types of things you hear. And it's
Right.
like,
they're not coming after you. You do have to go through a little bit more paperwork to deposit those larger sums, but it's not that they're coming after you. Yeah, but like I said, you can try, but I don't know. They've gotten to age 80 and not trusted banks and credit unions, so it may not change. But we do know that a lot of the folks, at least the folks that answered the survey, almost 94% of them have an account with a bank or credit union. And
Memphis where maybe about 3 months ago where there was an elderly couple who went to the bank and drew a large lump sum of money. I don't know what freaked them out, but they went and the employee, the teller, told her husband who went to their home and robbed them twice.
oh no, see, it's
That was maybe a few months ago.
in Memphis.
I don't want to say that was in Memphis. I'm sure it was in Tennessee, but it's things like that that end up on the news
Yes.
that our clients see. And
Right.
they freak out. They don't trust the teller now
Right.
because that one particular teller who is now never going to see the
Right.
light of day,
Right,
told her husband.
who robbed them. There was a law passed recently that allows banks and credit unions to hold transactions. So if they believe that financial exploitation is involved, they can actually hold a transaction and make a report to APS, and those funds won't go anywhere for 10 days. We're not seeing a lot of banks and credit unions take advantage of that law. It's a permissive law and provides them some liability from a suit if they choose to use it. But again, they may hold the transactions. There's also a card, a trusted individual card that was in the same law, where individuals can fill out a card where if the bank has a question about a transaction, they can contact a trusted individual. Last I heard, financial institutions and the Banks and Credit Union League and trade associations were working on policies and procedures on how to implement that. But we're seeing more protections, but still not, we can't guarantee a senior that something like that won't happen. That rarely happens though. Yeah, that's right. That's a very rare occurrence. Okay. Criminal statutes, just know that the criminal statute for financial exploitation was recently changed to increase the penalty for financial exploitation. And just keep in mind as well that over on the criminal side, just to know, their definitions of financial exploitation and age are different than those of adult protective services. So we're going to kind of have fun to see how all this meshes. We're going to have lots of fun with that. All right. The abuse registry, just know that the law was recently changed as well to say that when someone is convicted of financial exploitation, elder financial exploitation, a copy of that judgment now goes to the Tennessee Abuse Registry for placement of that individual on the abuse registry. The abuse registry is where we put everyone who's convicted or has been accused of and gone through due process for complaints of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. And that registry is checked by folks who employ individuals that interact with seniors, your nursing homes, subcontractors that provide aging services, things like along those lines. So that was a good change. And then you can look at, in the criminal side, the caregiver definition is different. Elderly adult, instead of meaning age 60, is now age 70. We did mention to the district attorneys, though, that everybody else uses age 60, and if they use age 70, that could cause some problems because there's a 10-year gap where they can receive services from aging service providers, but according to the statute, they're not considered elderly until they're 70. And then financial exploitation has a different definition over on the criminal side than it does in the APS statute. So we're going to have some fun with this over the next couple of years, I think, but we'll see how it works. All right, questions, and I am over time. So I will stop now.
On the abuse registry,
Yes.
we were yesterday about, some families can hire their own caregivers.
Yes.
Can family members get access to that abuse registry, and how do they do that?
Absolutely. I should have put a link, and I think there's a link in the resources presentation we're going to have, but if you just Google Tennessee Department of Health Abuse Registry, it will pop up, and you can enter their social security number, or you can enter their name. You can enter your own name if you want, if you were curious to see if you show up on the abuse registry. I've done it. I have a fairly common name, and so far no Laura Browns have committed elder abuse, fraud, or exploitation. So it's a good thing, right? But yes, the general public can check that registry. All right, any other questions? Awesome. Thank you guys so much, and thanks for their patience for going over.